I want to tell you something that changed the way I look at every garden I have ever grown. I had been gardening for 11 years before I learned this. 11 years of spraying, dusting, checking labels, rinsing vegetables 3 times before I felt comfortable feeding them to my family, and wondering in the back of my mind whether the stuff I was putting on my food was doing something to us that I did not want to think about too hard. 11 years before someone pointed me toward the way Amish women have managed kitchen gardens for 200 years without a single bottle of anything purchased from a store. And I want to be honest with you right now at the start. When I first heard that there were gardens producing abundant, clean food through the entire growing season with 0 chemical input and almost no pest damage, I thought I was about to hear something that would turn out to be an exaggeration. It was not an exaggeration. It was something that works so consistently and so completely that once I understood why it works, I felt genuinely angry that nobody had ever explained it to me before. Not in any gardening book I had read, not in any class I had taken, not in any advice I had been given by anyone in the conventional gardening world. Today I'm going to tell you exactly what it is, how it works, and how you can have it in your own garden this season. I am going to explain the science behind it because the science is what makes it undeniable. And I am going to give you the specific plants, the specific layouts, and the specific techniques that Amish kitchen gardeners have been using for generations to grow food so healthy and so pest-free that their neighbors with chemical sprayers are still fighting the same bugs year after year while the Amish garden next door just keeps producing. Stay with me because there is one specific technique near the end that I have never seen written down in any mainstream gardening resource, and it is the technique that ties the whole system together. Before I tell you what the Amish do, I need to tell you what we were sold instead and why, because that context is what makes everything else make sense. In the years after the Second World War, the American chemical industry found itself with enormous production capacity for compounds that had been developed for military purposes and suddenly had no military market. The solution was agriculture. Organochlorine compounds, organophosphates, synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, all of them found a new home in the American farming and gardening market through the 1950s and 1960s. The marketing was brilliant, modern, scientific, progress. The old way of managing pests through plant knowledge and garden design was reframed as primitive, as inefficient, as the kind of thing your grandmother did before science gave you a better option. What that marketing did not tell you is that the old way was not less effective. In many documented cases, it was more effective, because it worked with the biological systems of the garden instead of against them. A chemical spray kills the target pest. It also kills the predatory insects that were eating the target pest. It also kills the soil microorganisms that were feeding the plants that the pest was attacking. It disrupts the system that was managing the pest population naturally, and then it requires you to come back next season and spray again, because the system that would have managed the pest is no longer functioning. The Amish system does not work that way. It builds a garden ecosystem that manages its own pest populations. The plants themselves, the insects they attract, the soil biology underneath, all of it works together in a way that keeps any single pest species from ever building up to damaging numbers. It does not kill everything and start over every season. It builds something that gets stronger every year, not weaker. The chemical companies understood this. A garden that manages its own pest populations is a garden that never buys another bottle of spray. That is not a customer. So they kept selling the spray, and they kept funding the research that validated the spray, and they kept the knowledge of the alternative confined to the communities that never bought into the industrial model in the first place. The Amish were one of those communities, and what they preserved is what I am about to share with you. The foundation of the Amish pest management system is something that takes about 30 seconds to say and about 3 years to fully appreciate, and it is this. A healthy plant does not attract pests the way a stressed plant does. That statement sounds simple. The implications of it are profound. Every major pest species that attacks vegetable gardens, aphids, whiteflies, spider mites, cabbage worms, squash bugs, cucumber beetles, every one of them is what entomologists call an opportunistic feeder. They preferentially attack plants that are already stressed, already weakened, already struggling in some way. Stressed plants emit chemical signals that pest insects can detect, and that healthy plants do not emit in the same way. A stressed plant is essentially broadcasting its vulnerability on a frequency that the insects around it are tuned to receive. What stresses a plant? Inconsistent watering, nutrient deficiencies or imbalances, compacted soil that restricts root development, soil biology that has been disrupted by tillage or chemicals, being planted in the wrong conditions for its needs, being surrounded by other stressed plants. Any of these conditions and combinations of them put a plant into a state where it cannot produce the chemical defenses that healthy plants produce, and where it becomes attractive to the exact insects that would leave a healthy plant alone. The Amish approach to pest management starts not with the pests, but with the plants. Make the plants healthy at every level: soil biology, root development, water consistency, appropriate companions, and the pest pressure drops dramatically before you have done a single thing that looks like pest control. This is not a theory. It is documented in plant biology research. A 2003 study published in the journal Bioscience found that plants under optimal growing conditions produce significantly higher levels of secondary metabolites, the chemical compounds that function as natural pest deterrents, than plants under stress conditions. The Amish figured this out through generations of observation. The science confirmed it 100 years later. So the first layer of the Amish pest management system is healthy soil. Not fertilized soil, not amended soil. Healthy soil, meaning soil with a thriving biological community of bacteria, fungi, earthworms, and the thousands of other organisms that create the conditions plants actually evolve to grow in. Let me tell you what healthy soil actually does for a plant's pest resistance, because I think most people have never heard this explained clearly. The mycorrhizal fungi that colonize the roots of plants growing in undisturbed, biologically active soil do several things that directly affect pest resistance. They extend the plant's effective root system by orders of magnitude, making the plant dramatically more efficient at taking up water and minerals. A plant that is never water-stressed and never mineral deficient is a plant that is always producing at full capacity, including producing its own chemical defenses. The mycorrhizal network also facilitates communication between plants. Yes, plants communicate through chemical signals passed through the fungal network. When one plant in a healthy garden is attacked by a pest, that signal travels through the network to neighboring plants, which then upregulate their own chemical defenses preemptively. This is called systemic resistance induction, and it has been documented in peer-reviewed research since the 1990s. Every time you till the soil, you sever that fungal network. Every time you apply a systemic pesticide or a synthetic fertilizer with high salt content, you damage the soil biology that supports it. The garden that has been conventionally managed for several years has largely lost this network, and has lost with it the communication system that healthy gardens use to coordinate their own defense. The Amish kitchen garden is never tilled in the established beds. Compost is applied to the surface, and the soil biology pulls it down. The fungal network is intact. The communication system is functioning. And when an aphid lands on one plant in that garden, the signal goes out through the network, and the whole garden starts preparing. This is the first and most important layer. Healthy, undisturbed soil biology is the foundation that everything else is built on. Without it, the other techniques work partially. With it, they work completely. The second layer is what Amish gardeners call the border plantings, though they do not use that term because to them it is just how a garden is planted. Every Amish kitchen garden I have studied or spoken with gardeners about has a consistent pattern around its edges. Strong scented herbs and flowers planted thickly along the perimeter, and throughout the beds in a specific arrangement that creates overlapping zones of scent-based confusion for pest insects. Here is how pest insects find their host plants. The primary mechanism is smell. Insects that eat brassicas, your cabbage, broccoli, kale, and cauliflower, are attracted to the volatile compounds that brassicas emit as part of their normal growth. They can detect those compounds from significant distances and navigate toward them. If you plant your brassicas in a bed surrounded by other plants that emit strong, competing, volatile compounds, the pest insects have difficulty isolating the signal they are looking for. They fly into the area, get confused by the competing scents, and move on. The specific plants that Amish gardeners use for this purpose are not exotic or expensive. They are plants that were in every traditional garden in Europe and America before the chemical era. plants that are still easy to grow and essentially free once you have seed for them. Tansy is the first and most important. Tansy is a tall, fern-leaved perennial with flat yellow button flowers that spreads readily once established and comes back every year from the roots. Its scent is intense and distinctive, a sharp, almost medicinal smell that most pest insects find deeply disorienting. It is planted at the corners and along the back edge of the garden. It is one of the most effective pest confusers of any plant I know of, and it costs nothing after the first year because it spreads on its own. Southernwood is the second. Southernwood is a woody perennial artemisia with feathery gray-green leaves and an intense camphor-like scent. It was called lad's love in Old English gardens, and it was planted at garden edges specifically to deter moths, the adult stage of many caterpillar pests. Cabbage moths, the parents of the cabbage worms that devastate brassica crops, are strongly deterred by the scent of southernwood. A row of it along the windward edge of a brassica bed reduces cabbage worm pressure dramatically. Wormwood is the third. Another artemisia, intensely bitter and aromatic, planted in clumps throughout the garden, particularly near crops that are prone to aphid attack. Aphid colonies establish more slowly and in lower numbers in gardens where wormwood is present. The mechanism is partly scent-based confusion, and partly the fact that the bitter compounds wormwood releases into the soil around it are taken up by neighboring plants and make their tissues slightly less palatable to soft-bodied insects. Lavender along the sunny edges. Its scent repels many beetles, and the flowers simultaneously attract the predatory wasps and beneficial flies that eat pest insects. Lavender is doing two jobs at once. It is confusing the pests and feeding their predators. Marigolds, specifically the old-fashioned single-flowered French marigold, not the modern hybrid doubles, planted throughout the garden in every available gap. The root exudates of French marigolds are toxic to the soil nematodes that attack plant roots. The flowers attract hoverflies whose larvae are voracious aphid predators. The scent confuses whiteflies and thrips. The French marigold is the single most useful companion planting tool in the Amish garden, and it costs almost nothing because it self-seeds prolifically once established. Planting all of these together in and around the vegetable beds creates an overlapping scent landscape that is profoundly disorienting for pest insects. They are navigating toward the smell of food. What they find instead is a complex, competing, overwhelming blend of scents that makes it difficult to locate the plants they are looking for. Many of them leave. The ones that stay are met by the third layer of the system. The third layer is the beneficial insect habitat, and this is the part of the Amish system that I think is the most elegant and the most completely ignored by conventional gardening advice. Pest insects have natural predators. Aphids are eaten by ladybugs, lacewings, parasitic wasps, and hoverfly larvae. Caterpillars are parasitized by several wasp species. Spider mites are eaten by predatory mites. Whiteflies are controlled by parasitic wasps. Every pest you have in your garden has multiple natural enemies that are ready and willing to control the population for you. For free, continuously, forever. You do not have to do anything except provide the conditions those beneficial insects need to thrive. Here is the problem. Conventional garden management destroys those conditions. Broad-spectrum pesticides kill beneficial insects along with pest insects, often more effectively because beneficial insects like ladybugs spend more time on plant surfaces where spray residue concentrates. Bare cultivated soil provides no habitat for ground-dwelling beneficial beetles and spiders. Gardens planted in pure monoculture blocks with no flowers provide no nectar and pollen for the adult stages of many beneficial insects that need those resources to reproduce. The Amish kitchen garden provides all of those things. The perennial herb border provides continuous bloom from early spring through fall. The gaps between rows are filled with low-growing flowers. The soil is never bare and never heavily disturbed, so ground beetles and spiders can establish territories and hunt. The result is a garden with a resident population of beneficial insects that is large enough and diverse enough to respond quickly to any pest outbreak before it reaches damaging levels. I want to give you a specific number here because I think it changes how you think about this. A single adult ladybug eats between 50 and 60 aphids per day. A ladybug larva, the alligator-shaped little creature you may have seen and not recognized, eats between 200 and 400 aphids per day. A single lacewing larva eats 200 aphids per day. A garden with a healthy resident population of these insects is processing thousands of aphids per day continuously. Aphid populations cannot build to damaging numbers under that kind of predation pressure. The aphids are there, but they are being eaten faster than they reproduce. The conventional garden that has been sprayed has killed those predators. The aphid population rebounds after the spray because aphids reproduce faster than their predators do, and the predators are gone. The conventional gardener sprays again. The cycle continues. The beneficial insects never reestablish because every spray sets the population back to zero. The Amish garden that has never been sprayed has a predator population that has been building for years. It is in equilibrium. Pest populations fluctuate but never explode because the predator population fluctuates with them, always slightly behind but always catching up, always preventing the exponential growth that produces the kind of infestation that damages a crop. Now I want to tell you the specific technique I mentioned at the beginning, the one I have never seen written down anywhere in mainstream gardening literature, because I think it is the most counterintuitive piece of the whole system, and also the most powerful once you understand what it is doing. In Amish kitchen gardens, particularly in the older established homesteads in Lancaster County and the Ohio settlements, there is a practice around what they call the sacrifice planting. In a corner of the garden, usually the corner farthest from the main production beds, a small area is deliberately planted with an extra dense planting of a highly aphid-attractive crop. Nasturtiums are the most common choice. Sometimes it is a dense clump of broad beans, sometimes both together. This sacrifice planting serves a purpose that is the exact opposite of what you might expect. It is not planted to protect the rest of the garden by drawing pests away from it, though that does happen. It is planted to feed and maintain the resident predator population through the early season before pest pressure builds on the main crops. Here is the logic. Ladybugs, lacewings, and parasitic wasps need prey in order to reproduce. If the garden has no aphids in May, the beneficial insect population stays low. When the aphid population explodes on the main crops in June and July, the predator population has to build from a low base, and it takes time to catch up. During that catch-up period, the crop can sustain real damage. If the garden has a small, maintained aphid colony on the sacrifice planting in May, the predator population has been building and reproducing since May. By the time the aphid pressure reaches the main crops in June, the predator population is already large and responsive, and it suppresses the main crop infestation almost before it starts. You are deliberately maintaining a small pest population in a corner of your garden in order to keep your pest predators fed and reproducing, so that they are ready in force when you need them. This is biological pest management at a level of sophistication that the chemical industry does not want you to think about because it costs nothing, requires nothing purchased, and once it is established, it works better than anything that comes in a bottle. The first time I explained this to a conventional gardening friend, she looked at me like I had suggested something slightly insane. Then she tried it. That was 3 years ago. She has not sprayed anything in her garden since. Let me now put the whole system together for you in a practical sequence, because I want you to be able to actually implement this, not just understand it. In the first year, you are building the foundation. The most important thing you can do is stop tilling. If you have been tilling your garden beds, this is the year you stop. Mark your permanent beds and your permanent paths and commit to never putting a foot or a tool into the growing area again in a way that disturbs the soil structure. Apply 2 to 3 inches of finished compost to the surface of the beds in early spring and let the soil biology pull it down. Do not dig it in. In the same first year, establish your perennial pest deterrent border. Plant tansy at the corners. Plant southernwood along the edge that faces the prevailing wind, so its scent is carried across the garden. Plant lavender along the sunny southern edge. These are your long-term permanent plantings and they do not need to be replaced. They spread and strengthen on their own. Through the first season, plant French marigolds densely throughout every bed you have. 1 marigold for every 2 or 3 vegetable plants. Let some of them go to seed at the end of the season. They will self-sow and come back the following year without any effort from you. Set up your sacrifice planting in the corner farthest from your main brassica and nightshade crops. A patch of nasturtiums 2 feet square is enough to start. Do not spray it. Do not disturb it. Let the aphids find it and let the predators find the aphids. In the second year, you will notice a shift. The soil in your no-till beds will have a different texture, softer, more crumbly, with more earthworm activity visible when you set plants in. The perennial border plantings will have spread and filled in. The marigolds will be self-sowing before you even think about planting them. The beneficial insect population will be higher and more diverse than it was in the first year. By the third year, most people who have implemented this system report something that sounds almost too good to be true. They walk through their garden and the plants look different. The leaves are darker, more robust. The plants seem to shrug off the insect pressure that would have devastated them in a conventionally managed garden. Not because nothing is eating them, because what is eating them is being eaten in turn, continuously, invisibly, by a community of predators that has been building for 3 years and is now genuinely in control. This is the garden that the Amish have been growing for 200 years. Not a perfect garden with 0 insects. A balanced garden where the pest populations and the predator populations have reached an equilibrium that protects the crop without any external input. It is not magic, it is ecology. It is what a garden does when you stop destroying the systems that were managing it and let those systems rebuild. The chemical industry spent 70 years convincing you that those systems could not work without help from a bottle. They were wrong. Or more accurately, they knew they were wrong and said it anyway, because the bottle was their business model. The knowledge that proves them wrong has been growing quietly in Amish kitchen gardens the entire time. Here's what I want you to do this week. Walk through your garden and instead of looking for pests, look for beneficial insects. Look for the ladybug larvae, the small alligator-shaped creatures on the undersides of leaves near aphid colonies. Look for the lacewing eggs, tiny pale green spheres on hair-thin stalks that you will find on leaf surfaces if you look closely. Look for the small wasps hovering low over the soil surface, the ground-nesting parasitic wasps that are hunting caterpillar eggs. They are there. They have always been there. The first step in working with them is learning to see them. Then stop spraying. Even the organic sprays. Even the ones that say safe for beneficial insects on the label, because that label claim applies to the spray itself, but not to the disruption of the habitat and food web that any broad coverage spray causes. Stop spraying for 1 full season and watch what the garden does without that interference. Then plant the marigolds. This is the simplest and fastest entry point into this system. French marigolds throughout every bed, planted thickly, let to self-seed at the end of the year. You will see a difference in the first season, and you will understand from that difference why this knowledge is worth everything else I have told you today. The garden does not need you to fight for it. It needs you to stop fighting against it. Give it the soil biology, the companion plants, and the beneficial insect habitat it needs to manage itself, and it will do the rest. That is what the Amish knew. That is what the chemical era almost made us forget. And that is what you can start bringing back this weekend with nothing more than a packet of marigold seeds and the decision to put the spray bottle down for good.